The Fog is a horror movie from legendary film director John Carpenter, and this movie was released only 2 years after his big breakout film, the original movie Halloween, in 1978. Now fortunately, Carpenter decided to stick with the horror genre and delivers us a nice little ghost story. The film opens with a scene on the beach. There's an old man and he's telling a story to a bunch of younger kids around a campfire. The date is April 21st, and he tells a story from 100 years ago to the day when a ship called the Elizabeth Dane accidentally crashed onto the rocks following what it thought was a lighthouse signal, but was really just a beach fire, similar to the fire that these kids are hearing the story told to them around. And he concludes the story by telling all the kids that the souls of those lost in the shipwreck will come back looking for a fire along the beach, seeking revenge for what happened to them. It's a great little opening scene and effectively sets the tone for the type of movie that we're going to see. Everything starts out a little slowly, fog rolls into town, some weird things start happening. There's a scene early on where we actually have a cameo from the director, John Carpenter himself, appearing as kind of like this assistant in a church to a character called Father Malone, who's played by the actor Hal Holbrook. And so one of the first weird things that kind of happens is a brick falls out of the wall of the church and the father discovers like a ledger or some kind of diary hidden behind the church walls. And around the rest of the town, other weird things are happening. You know, there's like a store clerk and like a little gas station and, glass bottles on the shelves are shaking. Dogs are barking for no reason. There's cars that are parked and turned off, but their lights are flashing and the horns are honking. Just really weird things going on around the town as this fog is kind of rolling through. We slowly get introduced to more characters. Tom Atkins is driving this truck and he picks up this hitchhiker played by Jamie Lee Curtis. And throughout the movie, they kind of have their own storyline going on adjacent to other characters. So we have Adrienne Barbeau arguably playing our main character. She's this DJ who, her sound booth and her radio station setup is all in this lighthouse, which is a functioning lighthouse. It's a really cool set. She's kind of that typical nighttime jazz voice personality, plays really soothing music throughout the night while also delivering weather reports and stuff that apply to sailors and people living along the coast. Now, I already said that Jamie Lee Curtis is in this movie. She was obviously in Carpenter's first big film, Halloween. But what's cool about The Fog is that Jamie Lee Curtis's real mom, Janet Leigh, is in the film as well. Now, they don't play mother-daughter. Janet Leigh's kind of playing this organizer. We're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the town of Antonio Bay, and she's kind of organizing this celebration for it. And they're going to unveil a statue that salutes the original founders of the town. We do see that there's a ship out to sea. They're listening to Adrienne Barbeau's character's radio station, and she's delivering, a report about some fog rolling in. And this is where the action kind of starts to pick up, because this vessel out on the sea, they run across this larger ship, a ship that's obviously very old, like a century or more old, and that's where our ghostly figures appear, and they kill the men on this vessel. Now, aside from that attack on the men in their boat at sea, everything else that happens around town that night is pretty harmless and just kind of generally spooky. So people the next day are moving on with things just as planned. They're still going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the town, and they're just going about their lives as normal. But some of our characters are connected to those men at sea, and of course their family and friends, realize that the boat hasn't come back to the harbor. They start looking for them. They find the boat, but no bodies are there. And so this is when people finally start to think like, oh, something might be up here, and there's a mystery to be solved. Now back at the church, Father Malone has been going through this ledger that he found. It reveals a very, very dark secret about the foundation of the town. He shares that with Janet Leigh's character and kind of says, that we're celebrating things here for the wrong reasons. And without going into too many details or spoiling anything, let's just say that the ledger does reveal some dark secrets about the town and things that directly affect the celebration, especially of the people who founded it, a century ago. Now on the night of the actual anniversary, the fog rolls back into town and more serious things start happening. People start dying. One by one, they're going after people. And eventually we figure out that the ghosts are basically here to kill the descendants of these 6 what are called conspirators. These were the folks 100 years ago that set this bonfire on the beach and lured this ship, onto the rocks, causing the shipwreck and ultimately the loss of the lives of the people on that boat. Only a few people in the town really seem to wise up to that. Of course, most of them are our main characters. And by the end of the movie, they all wind up back at the church with Father Malone. And they're just trying to figure out what they can do to appease these vengeful souls and to eliminate the curse. Now, I've always kind of thought The Fog was an underappreciated entry in John Carpenter's filmography. I mean, it's the movie he made after Halloween, but before he made Escape from New York. And so it's just kind of like this lonely entry that I never felt got enough recognition. You know, honestly, it's not the scariest film he's ever made. It's kind of slow at points, but it's got really good character development. And in general, I like the tone of this movie. You know, John Carpenter's films have a look and a feel, but there's just this 80s feel that I like about horror movies from that period. All the effects are pretty much practically done, otherwise they're kind of optical effects where they're layered over the film elements, and so that's the way that you kind of get some of these fog effects. You know, in the behind the scenes you get to see some footage of these guys walking around and like spraying their fog machines everywhere, and you just see like what a challenge it was to work with fog. You know, probably something they didn't really anticipate, but as you might expect, the fog doesn't really stay in place for very long before it either blows out of the frame completely or just kind of dissipates to where it's not effectively as present as you want it to be. They also talk about doing some of these reshoots to kind of up the gore a little bit. Apparently the first cut of the film, you know, John Carpenter didn't think was extreme enough, and so they did some reshoots to try to make things a little more scary. This really isn't a violent film though, and it's also not terribly scary. Again, I just like the mood, I like the tone of it. It just comes from a period of filmmaking where like scary wasn't necessarily something jumping out at you or even people getting killed, even though there are deaths in this film. There's just a really good eerie presence. I mean, the fog itself is a character in the film, and we get to see it, you know, moving along the beach, working its way through the town. These are all practical effects, just the guys with their little fog machines spraying it all over the place, but it becomes this great menacing character. They tried remaking this movie in 2005, and I actually did watch that like a year or two ago. I think it popped up on Hulu or something. And you know, it's not great. It's not obviously not anywhere near as good as the original, in my opinion. It's one of those remakes that just is forgettable. You know, I mean, I watched the whole thing. It was fine. It was entertaining. But do I remember anything from it? Not really. It just goes to show that, you know, some of these movies, the original really holds on to that tone and what makes it special, and the remakes just feel a little purposeless, which, you know, for the most part is true. They're just kind of cashing in on the name established by the original film. So I really like the film a lot. It's definitely one of my favorite John Carpenter flicks. So if you've never seen the movie before, maybe you just haven't seen it in a long time, or possibly you saw the remake but never knew there was an original, I strongly encourage you to go check it out. It isn't available to stream on any of the big streaming services, but I do see that it's available on Shudder, which is, I think, this horror exclusive streaming site. So if you have access to that, I think you can watch it on there that way. Alternatively, you can just pick it up on a good old physical media Blu-ray. I got the limited edition steelbook packaging, so if you like these kind of collector's editions, it's a nice steelbook with some really good artwork on it. I wanted to do this film on the 21st, this review, because not that it's the anniversary of the film, but it's the anniversary of the story within the film. So April 21st is when that whole thing takes place. If you're a fan of 80s films like I am, I think you're really going to enjoy this one, so go check it out.